I warned my son 3 times. The third time, he didn't come home. He called me collect from a prison payphone, and the sound of that recorded voice telling me to accept the charges is something I will never forget for as long as I live. My name is Deborah Hensley, and for 23 years, I thought I knew my son better than I knew myself. I thought love was enough to keep him safe. I was wrong, and that mistake nearly cost both of us everything. This is the story of the night my phone rang at 2 in the morning, the name on the screen that read only unknown, and the choice I had to make in the seconds after I picked it up, a choice that would follow me for the rest of my life. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand something. I am not sharing this story for sympathy. I am sharing it because somewhere out there tonight, another mother is sitting in a kitchen just like mine, watching her son walk out the door, telling herself it will be fine, telling herself she is overreacting, telling herself that surely nothing that bad could happen to her family. I need her to hear this. I need you to hear this. Because what my son told me that night on the phone would force me to choose between protecting him and protecting myself. And I am still not sure, even now, that I chose correctly. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is a true story. The names have been changed to protect the people who lived through it. But everything you are about to hear happened to a real family, in a real house, on a real street that looked exactly like every other street in America. There was a mother, there was a son, and there was a warning that was ignored not once, not twice, but 3 separate times, each one louder than the last, each one closer to the edge than the one before it. Here is what I need you to know before we go any further. My son's name was Cody. He was 22 years old the year everything fell apart, and if you had met him on any ordinary afternoon, you would have liked him instantly. He had an easy laugh and a way of making people feel like the most interesting person in the room. Teachers loved him. Neighbors trusted him with their spare keys. He was, in every visible way, a good kid who had grown into what looked like a good young man. But somewhere underneath that easy laugh, something had shifted, and I was the only one close enough to see it happening. And still, I did not act quickly enough to stop it. 3 questions have haunted me every single day since that phone call, and by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why. Who was Cody really spending his time with in those final months before everything changed? What actually happened on the night that led to his arrest? The night the police say one thing and my son swears something entirely different? And what did Cody ask me to do for him from that prison payphone? A request that meant risking my own freedom, my own name, everything I had spent a lifetime building, just to save the boy I raised. I promise you, by the time this story ends, you will be asking yourself the same question I have asked myself every single night since. Would I have answered that call? Would I have done what I did? Or would I have hung up the phone and walked away, the way so many people told me I should have? Stay with me, because this story does not go where you think it is going, and the truth about what happened to my son is far more complicated and far more human than any headline ever printed about his case. To understand how we got to that phone call, you have to go back 3 years, to a small house on Maple Grove Avenue where I raised Cody almost entirely on my own. His father left when Cody was 7, and from that day forward, it was just the 2 of us, figuring out life one paycheck at a time. I worked as a school nurse, which meant I was never rich, but I was steady, and steady felt like enough. Cody grew up fast in some ways, and stayed a little boy in others. He would fix the neighbor's fence without being asked, then forget his own laundry for 2 weeks straight. He was the kind of son who made you proud and exhausted in the same breath, sometimes in the same afternoon, and I would not have traded either of those feelings for anything in the world. I remember the summer he turned 16, how he saved every dollar from his job bagging groceries so he could buy his first car, a rusted little sedan that barely ran, but that he loved like it was brand new off the lot. He would spend Saturday mornings in the driveway with the hood popped open, teaching himself how to change the oil from videos he found online, calling me outside every 20 minutes to show me some small victory. Those were good years, simple years, the kind you don't recognize as precious until you are looking back at them from somewhere much darker, wishing you could return to any single ordinary Saturday morning in that driveway. By the time Cody turned 20, he had graduated from community college with an associate's degree in business. And for a while, everything looked exactly the way I had hoped it would. He got a job at a local logistics company, moved into a small apartment 15 minutes from me, and started talking about saving for his own place someday, something bigger, maybe even a house with a yard. We had dinner together every Sunday without fail. He would tell me about his week, complain about his manager, ask my opinion on things he had already decided, the way sons do when they still want their mother's approval even after they think they don't need it anymore. I looked forward to those dinners more than almost anything else in my week. Then, about 8 months before everything changed, Cody lost that job. The company downsized, and he was one of a dozen employees let go with almost no warning, given a small severance check and a cardboard box to clear out his desk. He told me it was fine, that he would find something better within a few weeks, and I believed him, because he had always been resourceful, always the kind of person who landed on his feet. But the weeks turned into months, and instead of the panic I expected, Cody seemed strangely calm about money in a way that should have alarmed me sooner than it did. He started showing up to Sunday dinner in clothes I didn't recognize, driving a car that was newer than anything he could have afforded on unemployment, wearing a new watch he brushed off as, quote, a good deal from a guy he knew. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off and told me a friend was letting him borrow the car for a while. I wanted to believe him, so I did, the way mothers so often choose to believe the easier version of the truth. Around that same time, a new name started appearing in Cody's conversations, slipped in casually at first, the way you mention someone you assume the other person already knows. He called him Trey, and according to Cody, Trey was someone he had met through a mutual friend from his old job, someone who was, in Cody's words, quote, showing him how the real world actually worked. I never met Trey. I never saw a picture of him. I only knew him through the way Cody's voice changed when he talked about him, a kind of admiration I hadn't heard directed at anyone since Cody was a small boy looking up at his little league coach, the same wide-eyed respect, except this time it was pointed at a grown man I had never laid eyes on. Looking back now, I understand that admiration was the first true sign of trouble, but at the time, exhausted and hopeful, I mistook it for confidence. The first warning I gave my son came on a Sunday evening in early spring, while we were doing dishes together after dinner, the radio playing low in the background the way it always did in our kitchen. I asked him directly where the money was coming from, and for the first time in his life, Cody would not look me in the eye while he answered me. He told me he was, quote, handling some deliveries for Trey's business, nothing illegal, just moving product from one place to another for cash. Easy work, he said, work that barely felt like work at all. I remember setting down the plate I was drying and telling him, as calmly as I could manage while my hands trembled slightly at my sides, that if something sounded too easy to be legal, it usually was not legal at all. He told me I was overreacting. He told me I didn't understand how business worked anymore, that the world had changed since I was his age. He told me to trust him. I let it go that night because I did not want to be the mother who pushed her son away by asking too many questions, and that decision is one I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times since, wondering what would have happened if I had pushed harder in that exact moment. Life continued in that uneasy rhythm for the next several weeks. Cody still came to Sunday dinner. He still called to check on me when I had a bad week at work, still remembered small things like my dentist appointments or the anniversary of my mother's passing. On the surface, nothing about our relationship had changed. But underneath, I could feel him pulling away in small, quiet ways, coming late, leaving early, taking phone calls outside on the porch where I couldn't hear him, his voice dropping to a near whisper the moment he stepped through the door. I told myself he was just growing up, becoming his own man, entitled to privacy the way any adult child is. I told myself a lot of things that spring that I no longer believe were true. And through it all, I never stopped noticing. I simply stopped saying anything about what I noticed, and that silence, more than any single decision Cody made on his own, is where the real danger began to take root in our lives. The second warning came almost 2 months after the first one, and by then, the signs had grown too obvious to explain away with words like busy or tired or stressed. Cody missed a Sunday dinner for the first time in over a year, calling me 20 minutes before he was supposed to arrive to say something had come up with Trey and he couldn't make it. His voice sounded different that night, tight in a way I had never heard from him, like he was choosing every word carefully before he let it out, the way you speak when someone else might be listening. I asked him if everything was all right, and he told me yes, of course, everything was fine. He was just handling some things. I sat alone at a table set for two that night, the food going cold in front of me, and felt, for the first time, truly afraid for my son in a way I could not name or explain to myself. I drove to his apartment 3 days later without calling first, something I almost never did, because I needed to see his face when I asked him what was going on. When he opened the door, I noticed a duffel bag by the couch that I had never seen before, and stacks of small boxes near the kitchen counter that looked nothing like anything Cody would normally own, sealed tightly and labeled with codes instead of words. I asked him directly, for the second time, what he was involved in, and this time he did not laugh it off the way he had before. He told me, quietly, glancing toward the window as he spoke, that Trey had asked him to hold some packages for a few days as a favor, and that he would be paid well for it, more than he had made in a month at his old job. I told him this was the second warning I was giving him, and that I would not give a third. I told him that whatever Trey was involved in, it was not the kind of business a mother wanted her son anywhere near, and that no amount of easy money was worth what I could see happening to him right in front of me. Cody nodded, told me he heard me, and promised he would end it soon. I left that apartment wanting desperately to believe him, clinging to the small comfort of his promise the entire drive home. For a while, it seemed like he might actually be pulling away from it. He came to dinner the following Sunday looking more like himself, laughing at old jokes, asking about my week the way he used to, even offering to fix a leaky faucet in my bathroom the way he would have done a year earlier without a second thought. I let myself relax, the way parents do when they want so badly for the danger to have passed that they convince themselves it has. But 2 weeks after that dinner, Cody stopped answering his phone the way he normally did. Calls that used to be returned within the hour would go unanswered for a full day. Texts would get short, one-word replies instead of the long, rambling messages he usually sent me about nothing in particular. I told myself he was busy job hunting again. I told myself I was being an overprotective mother who needed to let her adult son live his own life. I gave him the benefit of every doubt I had left, even as some quiet part of me suspected I was running out of doubts to give. During those 2 weeks, I started noticing other small things too, details that seemed insignificant on their own, but that formed an uneasy pattern when I finally allowed myself to see them clearly. A car I didn't recognize idling outside his apartment building one evening when I stopped by unannounced again. A conversation I overheard fragments of when he thought I had already left the room. Something about a shipment being delayed and someone being, quote, not happy about it. I asked him about that phone call directly, and he brushed it off so quickly, so smoothly, that I almost believed I had imagined the tension in his voice moments before. I did not imagine it. I know that now with a certainty that still makes my chest tighten whenever I think back on it. The third and final warning happened on a Thursday night, the last time I would speak to my son as a free man for a very long time. He called me himself, which surprised me, since it had been days since he'd reached out first without me calling him twice beforehand. His voice was different again, faster this time, edged with something that sounded almost like excitement mixed with fear, the two emotions tangled together in a way that made it hard to tell which one was winning. He told me Trey had a bigger opportunity for him. One final job that would set him up for months, maybe longer, enough money that he could finally move somewhere better. Maybe even help me with some bills I hadn't told him were piling up. He wanted my blessing. He wanted me to tell him it was a good idea, the way he used to want my approval before every big decision he made as a boy. Instead, I begged him not to do it. I told him that every instinct I had as his mother was telling me this was the moment everything would go wrong, that whatever this final job was, it would cost him more than he understood, more than any amount of money could ever repay. He told me I worried too much. He told me he loved me. He told me not to wait up. Those were the last words my son said to me before the night that changed both of our lives forever. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with the porch light on, the way I used to when he was a teenager staying out past curfew, telling myself he would walk through that door any minute with some story about traffic or a friend needing a ride. The same excuses he used to give me at 17 that I would pretend to believe. Instead, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, my phone rang, and the caller ID showed only the word unknown. I stared at it for 3 full rings before I found the courage to answer, some part of me already knowing that whatever was on the other end of that call was going to change everything I understood about my life up to that point. I was right. And what I heard in the seconds after I picked it up is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. A moment I have relived more times than I can count, wondering if there was anything at all I could have done differently in the hours before it happened. I answered that call on the 3rd ring, and the first sound I heard was not my son's voice at all, but an automated recording informing me that I had a collect call from an inmate at the county correctional facility and asking if I would like to accept the charges. I said yes before the recording had even finished its sentence, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone entirely. There was a pause, a click, and then Cody's voice came through, smaller than I had ever heard it, stripped of all the confidence he had carried on the phone just hours earlier. He told me he had been arrested. He told me it was bad. He told me he was scared, a word my son had not used with me since he was maybe 8 years old and afraid of the dark after watching a movie he wasn't supposed to see. I asked him what happened, and for a long moment, all I heard was his breathing on the other end of the line, ragged and uneven, before he finally found the words to begin explaining. What Cody eventually told me was that the final job Trey had offered him was not the simple delivery he had been led to believe. He had been asked to transport a package to a location across the state line, and somewhere along that drive, police had pulled him over for what began as a routine traffic stop, a broken taillight, something so small it seemed almost cruel in hindsight. What they found in the trunk of that borrowed car was enough to change the entire trajectory of his life in a matter of minutes. Cody swore to me, and has continued to swear to this day, that he did not fully understand what he was carrying, that Trey had told him it was nothing more than electronics being resold, and that he had been too eager for the money, and too trusting of a man he barely knew, to ask the questions he should have asked from the very beginning of their arrangement months earlier. In the days that followed, I found myself doing things I never imagined I would do. I called every lawyer whose name I could find, sitting on hold for hours at a time, my school nurse's office covering my shifts while I paced the parking lot outside, trying to understand words like arraignment and bail hearing and mandatory minimum, terms that had meant nothing to me a week earlier and now controlled every waking thought I had. I drove to the county jail and sat in a waiting room full of other mothers, other wives, other families wearing the same exhausted, hollowed-out expression I imagined was on my own face. We didn't talk much to each other, but there was an understanding in that room, a quiet recognition passed between strangers that we were all living through some version of the same nightmare, each of us clutching folders full of paperwork we barely understood. The bail hearing itself was one of the longest 20 minutes of my life. I sat in the 3rd row of a courtroom that felt colder than any room I had ever been in, listening to a prosecutor describe my son using words I did not recognize as belonging to the boy I had raised, Words like distributor and knowing participant. Words that made him sound like a stranger, someone dangerous, someone I would have crossed the street to avoid. I wanted to stand up and correct every sentence, to tell them about the boy who fixed the neighbor's fence without being asked, about the 16-year-old who taught himself to change oil in our driveway. But that is not how courtrooms work, and I learned that lesson painfully, silently, from a hard wooden bench. The investigation moved slower than I ever thought possible, and faster than I was ready for, both at the same time. Detectives wanted to know everything about Trey, a man I had never met and could barely describe beyond the stories Cody had told me over the previous 8 months. It became clear very quickly, through conversations with the lawyer we eventually hired, that Cody was not the only young man Trey had recruited this way, promising easy money to people who needed it badly enough to stop asking questions about where that money actually came from. Some of what came out during that investigation shocked even me. Details about how long this operation had been running, how many families it had already quietly destroyed before it ever touched mine, how carefully Trey had chosen young men exactly like my son, capable, hardworking, recently unemployed, and just desperate enough to accept an offer that should have raised every red flag imaginable. I kept waiting for someone to tell me my son was simply a victim of circumstance, and I kept waiting for someone to tell me he was exactly as responsible as the charges suggested, and both of those answers seemed to exist at the same time, refusing to resolve into anything simple, no matter how many hours I spent turning them over in my mind late at night. I read every document the lawyer sent me twice, sometimes 3 times, searching for some detail that would make the whole situation make sense, some piece of information that would let me sleep through an entire night again without waking at 2 in the morning out of habit, listening for a phone that wasn't ringing. The hardest part of that entire investigation was not the legal complexity or the endless paperwork, or even the money we were spending on legal fees that I honestly could not afford. It was the silence in my own house every evening when I came home from the jail, from the lawyer's office, from another day spent trying to hold together a life that felt like it was unraveling one thread at a time. I would sit at that same kitchen table where Cody and I had shared 1,000 Sunday dinners, staring at the empty chair across from me, and I would ask myself the same question over and over. Had I missed something I should have caught sooner? Had my warnings been too gentle, too easy to dismiss, delivered with too much love and not enough force? Had I failed my son long before that phone rang at 2 in the morning, in ways I was only now beginning to understand? And would I ever fully forgive myself if the answer to that question turned out to be yes? 3 weeks after Cody's arrest, I received a phone call that changed the entire shape of this story. It came from a woman named Patricia, a name I did not recognize at first, who explained that her own son had been arrested in connection with the same case, working for the same man Cody had known as Trey. Her voice on the phone was calm in a way that surprised me, the calm of someone who had already lived through the worst of the shock and come out somewhere quieter on the other side. Patricia told me something that made my stomach drop in a way I had not felt since that first 2 in the morning phone call. Her son had tried to walk away from Trey's operation months earlier, and when he did, Trey had threatened him, not with violence exactly, but with something almost as effective, threatening to report him to police for crimes he had already unknowingly participated in, crimes that would follow him regardless of whether he stayed or left. Patricia believed, and eventually so did I, that Cody had not simply been a willing young man chasing easy money. He had been trapped the moment he accepted that first delivery, told in 100 small ways that he could never truly leave without consequences following him and everyone he loved. This revelation changed everything about how I understood the son I thought I knew so completely. I confronted Cody about it during my next visit, sitting across from him in a small room that smelled like bleach and old coffee, the fluorescent lights humming overhead in a way that made everything feel slightly unreal. For the first time since his arrest, he finally told me the full truth, his voice breaking in places I had never heard it break before, not even when he was a small boy scared of thunderstorms. He admitted that he had tried to back out months before that final job, the same week I had given him my second warning, and that Trey had made it very clear what would happen if he tried to disappear, describing threats specific enough that Cody had genuinely believed his life, and possibly mine, could be in danger if he simply walked away. My son had not ignored my warnings out of arrogance or carelessness the way I had assumed for weeks. He had ignored them out of fear, terrified that telling me the truth would either put me in danger or force me to watch him get arrested regardless of what he chose to do next, caught between two outcomes that both felt impossible to survive. The lawyer we had hired uncovered records showing a pattern of coercion stretching back over a year. Other young men who had tried to leave and face similar threats, some of whom had gone to police only to be dismissed as simply trying to reduce their own charges, their warnings lost in a system that saw them as criminals first and victims second, if it saw them as victims at all. This new evidence became the foundation of Cody's defense, an argument that he had been manipulated and controlled by someone far more experienced in criminal enterprise than any 22-year-old could reasonably be expected to recognize or resist, someone who had built an entire operation around finding exactly the kind of desperate, hopeful young men who would never see the trap until they were already standing inside it. The courtroom on the day this evidence was formally presented felt different from every hearing before it. For the first time, I watched the prosecutor's expression shift slightly, a small crack in the certainty that had defined every previous interaction we'd had with the legal system, a flicker of something that might have been reconsideration passing across her face as the lawyer laid out testimony from 3 other families who had lived through nearly identical circumstances. I sat in that same third-row bench, gripping the edge of my seat so tightly my fingers ached, listening to details about Trey's operation that painted a picture far larger and far more calculated than anything I had imagined during those long nights at my kitchen table. When the judge finally addressed the full picture presented by both sides, the tension in that courtroom felt heavier than anything I had experienced in my entire life. Heavier even than the moment I first answered that collect call at 2 in the morning. I sat with my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles had gone white, watching my son stand at that podium, no longer the confident young man who had once told me not to wait up, but someone smaller, older somehow, carrying the weight of every choice that had led him to this exact moment, his shoulders curved forward as though bracing for a blow he had already decided he deserved. Whatever was about to be decided in that room would define the rest of both of our lives, and there was nothing left for either of us to do but wait for the words that would finally answer the question I had been asking myself since that phone rang at 2 in the morning, the question of whether the truth, once finally spoken out loud, would be enough to change anything at all. The judge's decision that afternoon was not the outcome I had prayed for every single night since Cody's arrest, but it was not the worst outcome either. And in the strange, unfair arithmetic of the justice system, I have come to understand that sometimes that has to be enough to hold on to. Because of the evidence showing coercion, and because it was Cody's first offense, the sentence he received was significantly reduced from what the original charges had threatened, though it still meant real time behind real walls, time that would take him away from me for longer than either of us wanted to accept, longer than any number of Sunday dinners could ever make up for once he came home. I remember the exact sound of the gavel, a small, ordinary sound that somehow carried the weight of everything that had happened over the previous months, and I remember Cody turning to look at me one last time before they led him away, mouthing the words, "I'm sorry, Mom," words I had waited weeks to hear him say out loud, words that broke something open in my chest that I am still, in many ways, trying to put back together. The months that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. I visited him every chance the facility allowed, sitting across from my son in a room designed to strip away any illusion of normalcy, watching him grow thinner, quieter, older in ways that had nothing to do with the passage of time and everything to do with what he was living through day after day inside those walls. I brought him books when I was allowed to. I told him about the neighborhood, about the new family that moved in down the street, about small, ordinary things that felt almost absurd to discuss given everything that had happened. But that seemed to matter to him more than I expected, small threads connecting him back to the life he was fighting to return to. Something else happened during those visits too, something I did not expect going in. Cody began to talk to me the way he hadn't since he was a teenager, honestly, without the guardedness he had carried in those final months before his arrest. He told me about the men he'd met in Trey's operation, about how easily he understood now why so many of them had never spoken up, trapped by the same fear and the same shame that had kept him silent for so long. He told me about how much he wished he had trusted me with the truth the very first time I asked him in that kitchen while we did dishes together. How different everything might have looked if he had simply let me help him instead of trying to protect me from a danger he didn't fully understand himself. Trey himself was eventually arrested several months later, following the same pattern of evidence Patricia's son had helped uncover, a slow unraveling of an operation that had preyed on young men across 3 different counties for well over a year. Though I will not pretend that arrest gave me the closure some part of me expected it to, it did confirm something I needed to know for certain, that my son had truly been caught in something far larger and far more calculated than a simple, bad decision made by a careless young man. Something engineered by someone who understood exactly how to exploit hope and desperation in equal measure. Cody is home now, rebuilding a life that looks nothing like the one he imagined for himself at 22, but a life that is entirely, honestly his own. He works construction now, comes home tired in a way that seems to satisfy him more than any fast money ever did. We still have Sunday dinners, though the silence between us these days is a different kind of silence than before, one built on truth instead of things left unsaid, one I have come to treasure rather than fear. I think about those 3 warnings often, turning them over in my mind the way you might turn over a stone looking for something underneath it. I used to believe that if I had only said something louder, sooner, more forcefully, none of this would have happened. I no longer believe that entirely. What I believe now is that love does not always look like being able to stop the people we care about from making painful choices. Sometimes it looks like staying close enough that when they finally do reach out, however late, however desperate, however far they've fallen, there is still someone there to answer the phone. So I'll leave you with the same question I have asked myself every single day since that call came through at 2 in the morning. If your own child called you from a place you never imagined they would end up, frightened and finally telling you the truth, would you have answered? And knowing everything you've just heard, do you think Cody deserved the second chance this story gave him? Or do you believe some choices should never be forgiven, no matter the circumstances behind them? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. We read every single one of them, and we would genuinely love to hear your perspective on this story. And if this one moved you the way it moved us telling it, wait until you hear what happened to another family just 1 street over, in a story we'll be sharing very soon. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss it, and thank you, truly, for staying with us until the very end.